Within the next 45 minutes, the league as we know it is about to enter a transition period as we go through another NBA Finals with the Spurs and the Pacers. Many big-time stars, including Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, are planning to retire. And we take a look at this year's upcoming draft class, previewing some players, some fits, and of course the upcoming draft lottery as well. Last episode, we had our annual league-wide rebrand. That's why every team across the NBA looks a little bit different. I always like to spice in things up here in my 2K series, and I think I found some pretty cool jerseys across the league this year. The episode before that was not so cool because we were up by 14 with 5.5 minutes to go in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals, and we completely blew it. We do not need to go into any further detail. You all saw what happened. Let's move on. So, with us falling to the Spurs, they now enter the finals against the Indiana Pacers, and we do not get to see Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler chase one more championship unless they decide to change their minds and come back. I think the Spurs are certainly the favorite here with Luka Doncic and Victor Wembanyama. Obviously, they're not invincible. We were a 14.5-minute comeback away from beating them in this series, but they're still the better team over Indiana. But don't sleep on the Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton has been hooping. Both of these teams made one big move at the deadline, and it was ironically with each other. Jalen Duren being swapped for Andrew Nembhard. The Spurs add some microwave scoring while the Pacers add a true starting five. So let's get this series started. The 2027 NBA Finals as Game 1 goes to the Spurs 115-111 despite a stinker from Luka Doncic and Jeremy Sohan, who played really well over the last few games against us, going 0 for 6. Tyrese Halliburton did what he could, but Pascal Siakam, Jarris Walker, and Keyshawn George combined to go 7 for 30 from the field. Game 2 goes to the Spurs, 31-16, 5-2-4 for Wemby in a game where the Spurs shot 41 three throws. Luka played well. Andrew Nembhard shot a tour date, particularly the date of when MLB The Show 25 comes out. And if you haven't voted for the franchise team in the community tab, you should. Halliburton played well, but Keyshawn George and Jarris Walker combined to go 4 for 20. These two guys are selling the bag. Walker's been horrible the entire playoff run. Granted, he missed the first series due to injury, but his play has fallen off a cliff. Keyshawn George, meanwhile, has had a good postseason run, but has shot it horribly in the finals, as Game 3 is also won by the Spurs. San Antonio's in clear control. Luka with a 40-piece. Halliburton played well again. Jarris Walker had a good game, but might be too little too late with another stinker from Keyshawn George. And the Spurs are now in position to sweep them in Game 4, and they're blowing them out early. Yeah, I don't think Indiana's got a chance here. We're going to hop in with around 30 seconds left as Tyrese Halliburton pulls it for 3. A huge triple by Tyrese Halliburton to cut the lead all the way to 28. Not ideal. So Luka's going to dribble out the clock, and there you go, folks. The San Antonio Spurs have swept Indiana. They win the NBA Finals, a very anticlimactic ending to one of the most exciting postseasons in NBA history, where every series after the first round went at least 6 games, with 4 Game 7s, including both the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. And then the NBA Finals ends up being boring and unexciting with 4 blowouts. The Spurs mop through Indiana. Luka Doncic wins ring number 1 in his first season out of Dallas. Victor Wembanyama wins the MVP and wins his first championship. And I'm not really sure how to feel about this in terms of our perspective, because obviously the Pacers were overmatched by San Antonio, and this kind of tells me if we were in the finals, we probably would have beaten Indiana. So we were a 14-point in 5-minute comeback away from probably winning the NBA Finals, which is going to sting for a while. But this also shows how close our team was and how good we truly were. It really felt like that oh my God, he is tall. Jesus Christ. It really felt like the 3 best teams in the league throughout the year were the Spurs, the Warriors, and the Thunder. And it was always going to be a collision course to make it out of the Western Conference. And whoever got out would be the front runner to win the whole thing. Luka led them in scoring. Victor Wembanyama had 6 blocks. As for the Spurs, Benedict Mathurin led the way. Halliburton had 16 and 16 on poor efficiency. So an ugly NBA Finals with 4 blowouts in favor of the Spurs. They win the NBA title. Another ring for Coach Popovich as Victor Wembanyama wins the Finals MVP. I have a feeling him and Luka together, this probably will not be their last championship. Well, it will be if I have anything to say about it. But again, it really felt like our team was right there. Again, if we didn't completely choke in the fourth quarter of Game 7, we probably would have won the finals. So it's easy to say we're right at the top, we'll be back next year. But as we know, that's probably not true unless Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler change their minds. Especially in the case of Curry, he is certainly more than good enough to come back. But he's also 39 years old and a family man. So in a way, I get it. But he might be the only one stopping a potential Spurs dynasty from coming. So now it's time for the moment of truth. Will they be retiring or will they be pulling a fast one on us? All right, here we go. Oh my goodness, he's staying! Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler are both gone for good. It's over. A lot of other big-name retirements in here, including Kevin Durant, Drew Holiday, DeMar DeRozan, Tobias Harris, Chris Middleton, Draymond Green, Bradley Beal, Andre Drummond. Huge list of retirements. There's Gary Payton, the former Warrior. I always felt like this was going to be a transition period for the league because there's so many guys who are retiring, including Jimmy Butler, who we traded for at the Season 1 deadline. If I were to go back in time, I would do the move again. It was a good trade for us. He got worse as the years went along, but it's understandable. He's 37 years old. An incredible career for Jimmy Butler, in my opinion, belonging in the Hall of Fame. He led multiple Heat teams to the NBA Finals, and he was great for 15 years almost. And then we get to Stephen Curry, one of the greatest players to ever pick up the basketball and certainly one of the most influential. He's coming off the most efficient season of his career. Even at 39 years old as the oldest player in the league, he's still got a lot left in the tank, but he's the oldest player in the league. It's understandable for him wanting to retire, averaging nearly 25 points per game through his career, just shy of 30,000 points, and of course, the greatest three-point shooter ever by far, and one of the most influential players of this century. LeBron, Kobe, and then Steph, who finishes 9th all-time in scoring. Jimmy, for what it's worth, is in 84th. Luka's already passed him, which is kind of wild. Curry is 17th in field goals made, obviously first in three-pointers by well over 1,000. My goodness, he really is that guy. Along with that, he finishes 56th in free throws. Jimmy Butler finished higher in that category in 37th. Curry comes in 17th all-time in assists, 30th all-time in steals, 43rd all-time in minutes played, 19th in turnovers, but we can move that along. He's not on the three-point percentage list because he hasn't officially retired yet, but I noticed he is .002 points lower than his brother Steph Curry, which is kind of crazy. Also, shout out Tim Legler. He doesn't hold many of the team scoring records because a guy named Wilt Chamberlain played here. He does come in 3rd all-time in playoff points in a game that actually happened earlier this season against OKC. 8th in terms of points in a season, 1st in terms of all-time points on the team, and that number does not count for the final 3 seasons of the series. 1st in field goals, 1st in three-pointers. Him and Clay are the only two with over 1,000. Curry's resume consists of being a 4-time champion, 2-time MVP, 1-time Finals MVP, 12-time All-Star, 4-time first-team All-NBA, 4-time second-team All-NBA, and while we're at it, here's Jimmy's 7-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA, led the Heat to the Finals twice. Shout out to both of them for some great careers. We got to highlight some of these other guys as well. Kevin Durant spent 3 seasons in Golden State, won 2 championships, won the Finals MVP both times. He certainly leaves a complicated legacy in Golden State, but in my opinion, he should get his number retired by the Warriors, given that he won 2 Finals MVPs with the team and was a big reason that the dynasty was able to stay strong after choking the 3-1 lead. Draymond Green, another Warrior legend. We had him in year 1 of this series. He was really bad. We knew we had to move off of him, but still one of the more important figures of the last 15 years in the league, for better or worse. I assumed Klay Thompson was going to retire with these guys, but he's going to stick it out for another year. So again, shout out to Steph and Jimmy, Stephen Curry in particular. What a career. He changed the game. The three-point line was part of basketball when he got drafted, and now it's one of the most important parts of the game because of him. He revolutionized players being three-point specialists and turning into really, really good players. Shout out Killian Hayes as well, who's retiring. So now, our roster looks entirely different, and Steph Curry being older is a big reason why I picked the Warriors for this series to begin with. We've got two parts to this series: competing for a title with Steph and figuring out what comes next. Part 1 is now over, and we have made it into Part 2. How do we win without him? Our main roster building philosophy has been trying to contend with Curry on the roster, but we've been planning for life without him as well. Mike Malone headlines the list of retiring coaches as KD and Steph make the Hall of Fame. I'm surprised they're the only two, though. No DeMar DeRozan, no Bradley Beal, no Jimmy Butler, no Draymond Green. I'm really surprised by that. In terms of jersey retirements, Draymond, Steph, and KD. Only Oklahoma City for Kevin Durant. Again, I think he should get his number 35 retired by Golden State. But there are some other omissions as well. DeMar DeRozan with Toronto. You can make a case for Bradley Beal with Washington. Jimmy Butler with Miami as well. I know it was an ugly breakup, but he led them to 2 finals. In terms of league meetings, 2 expansion teams will be joining the league. I figured it was about time. I've been hinting at it for a while. We will be adding 2 new teams, and I will be showing you them in about 30 seconds. I'm not going to add this, but I did not know you could do an elimination tournament for the draft lottery. I might have to make a one-off video with that at some point because that sounds hilarious. Again, I'm not going to do it, but it would be a funny video. We're also going to change it to where players will wear their NBA team jerseys in the All-Star game because that gives the All-Star game way more aura. To the one person who voted yes, you know ball. So in terms of league realignment, we've got some new faces here. We've been assuming Seattle and Vegas would be the 2 spots, but that's actually not the case. So we do have Seattle. The Sonics are coming in, of course. I feel like I always have to include the Sonics whenever I add expansion. The Sonics franchise in NBA 2K22 was one of my most important and one of my best series ever. And then in the Eastern Conference, the Montreal Huskies. So Montreal lands a team over Las Vegas. And I think the biggest loser here is actually the New Orleans Pelicans because they've been planning on moving to the Eastern Conference with a Las Vegas expansion team. Now they can't, and obviously the East is a lot worse than the West. Into the draft lottery now. The Jazz finished with the worst record for a 3rd year in a row. Obviously, we own a lottery-protected Bulls pick, and they will be picking in the lottery, so we will not get that pick. But it could be very valuable next year. Their highest-rated player right now is Brandon Pajemski. Yikes. So we do not have a lottery pick, but it'll certainly be interesting to watch the show unfold. Oklahoma City has multiple lottery picks. Please, Lord Jesus, do not let them move up. The Jazz, I think, have 3 picks in the lottery, and overall, nearly a 30% chance with those 3 picks combined to land the number 1 spot. So here we go. Pick number 16 goes to the Thunder. Keep in mind, there's 2 extra lottery picks now as the Thunder get 15 as well, so they do not move up. Thank God. I don't expect them to keep those picks. I think either they move up or they move out for an impact player. The Kings get number 14. They have a very bright future after making the playoffs last year. The Utah Jazz land the 13th pick, one of their 3 lottery selections. The other 2 projected in the top 5 as the Bulls get number 12. Their pick next year officially unprotected, and we have it. Number 11 will go to the Portland Trail Blazers, who have a very bright future. They've been drafting well over the last handful of years. Number 10 goes to the Atlanta Hawks. They have 2 more lottery picks this year, meaning they will make 8 lottery picks in the first 3 seasons of this series as they get number 9. The Clippers have moved into the top 4, and man, they need it. Their future is rough. The Phoenix Suns land at number 8. That means the Jazz, their 2nd pick, moves into the top 4. Number 7 goes to the Hornets. That means the Wizards move into the top 4, and the Jazz will be joining them. As for the expansion teams, the Sonics get 6, and the Huskies get number 5. So our top 4 teams are the Jazz again, the Wizards, and then the Clippers. Number 4 will go to the Clippers. So the Jazz now have 2 top 3 picks. Could they get 1 and 2 by chance? It's down to them and the Wizards. Number 3 goes to the Jazz. The Wizards and Utah were amongst the 2 worst teams in the league last year. They are now in the top 2 as the 2nd pick will go to the Washington Wizards. And that means for the second time in the last 3 years, the Utah Jazz will be getting the number 1 overall pick. And the best part about this draft lottery is that Boston did not move up into the top 2 this time. So it's Utah, Washington, and Utah again in the top 3. The Jazz have 5 first-round picks this year. 1, 3, 13, 23, and 24. That is a lot. Might they finally not be the worst team in the NBA? As for us, we do not own a first-rounder. Our pick, number 31, belongs to the Pelicans as part of the Brandon Ingram trade last year at the deadline. But being that Steph and Jimmy are now officially gone, you'd think we're looking to get younger, and we've certainly got the ammo to move up into the first round if we want. That Bulls pick is, of course, very valuable, along with our swap best Sixers and Clippers pick in 2029. But as of now, we only own pick 54 in the second round. I think we're going to keep Steve Kerr for now. It would make sense to move off of him in terms of the timing, but I still think he's a good coach for us. We are going to hire a new CFO and team doctor, though. And now it's time to talk some NBA draft. The nuts and bolts of today's episode. We're going to go through some prospects that we've already talked about, some guys who are newer faces, and some potential fits for us. Even though we do not pick until number 54, again, you guys know I love moving up and down the board, as we did last year, twice, getting picks 18 and 19 for Kajai Stokes and Roman Loggins-Burl. We're certainly in an interesting spot as we go into this draft, because with our 2 older players gone, we've got to figure out who the number 1 option on this team is. Could it be Jonathan Kuminga? He's going to be entering year 7. I feel like we would know if he could be the number 1 by now, but I still think he can improve and be an all-star. Of our recent draft picks, I don't think it'll be Kajai Stokes. I think he's a really good player, but I've compared him to Drew Holiday since we picked him. I don't think he has a second gear in terms of his ceiling. Antoine Salis is an interesting one because he can really score the basketball. Is he going to be a 22-point-per-game scorer at his peak, or is he going to be like a 28-point-per-game guy? Because that would certainly change some things. I do think Salis will be our leading scorer next year unless we add a big-name star. But I don't know if he can be the true number 1 because the rest of this game needs some polish. I think he's improved a lot as a defender and a playmaker, though, so the signs are there. I think Roman Loggins-Burl, meanwhile, has the highest theoretical upside in terms of if everything goes right for every player on this team, Loggins-Burl has the highest ceiling. He's got a very long ways to go, especially compared to Kuminga and Salis, who are a lot farther ahead of him. But I think Loggins-Burl has the highest upside. And I think the good thing about this core is that most of our group is under contract for at least 2 more years, so we'll be able to stick it out with these guys. Adembona and Onyeka Okongwu only have 1 more year. Jabari Springer is the only guy who got any real run in the postseason who will be a free agent. I have no idea what his market will look like. It could be $5 million a year. It could be 20. I genuinely have no idea. But outside of the 3 bigs, everybody else, Ingram, Kuminga, and the 3 draft picks, all are under contract for at least 2 more years. So as we take a look at this draft class, I will be going over their stats for the season throughout the video when we talk about them. Here's a full look at 40 of the more notable players in this class with their final numbers, what their stock was when we last may have talked about them, and if it's gone up or down, really since the start of March or so. So if you want to pause the video, take a longer look, feel more than free to do so. As for the NCAA tournament, the big storyline was one of the all-time Cinderella runs. The 13th seeded Maine Black Bears make it to the Final Four, losing to Houston. And the Cougars end up beating Illinois in the national championship game. The Illini beat Creighton in the Final Four to do so. Shaquille Hunter, the freshman big, we'll be talking about him today. He wins the tournament MVP. His stock is risen higher than anybody's this season and could potentially squeak his way into the top 5 after a great tournament run. So going into the year, Norwood Nobles from Minnesota was the projected number 1 pick, but Jabari Ogabari from Purdue and Cam McKnight from Illinois have closed the gap. Now, 2 of the 3 mock drafts do have the Jazz picking Nobles at number 1, and the one that doesn't has Nobles going at number 3, which would still be to the Utah Jazz. I think it's a 3-player draft at the top, and it's a very fascinating dynamic that the Jazz have 2 of the 3 picks. So I think part of it is trying to figure out who's the 2 guys you really want, and who do you not think the Wizards would pick at number 2. So we'll start with Norwood Nobles, who was the top projected pick coming into the year. And it's not that he had a bad season by any stretch. 17 points per game, over 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 52% from the field. He's 6'10". He can handle the ball. He can run the floor. He has passing vision of a point guard. He can create his own shot, and he's a versatile defender. He was a little inconsistent on a game-by-game basis this year, and the outside shot is not as far along as evaluators had hoped. But I still think he's got probably the highest upside in this class when you look at his size at 6'10", 230. He's got an NBA body right away. You look at the defensive versatility, and you look at what he provides as a playmaker and the overall scoring upside. I definitely think he could be a franchise-changing player, and the Utah Jazz need that pretty bad because, well, they stink. As for the other two, Ogabari and McKnight, their stocks have both gone up this year. They were both 5-star recruits coming into the year, but neither of them were projected to go in the top 3. And both of them were absolutely fantastic. I really think the Jazz need to add some more size. I think picking Jabari Ogabari makes a lot of sense. But the weird thing is, as we look at the Wizards at number 2, I don't think they're going to pick him because they drafted 5 centers last year. No, that's not an exaggeration. They literally drafted 5 centers last year, including Noah Longley, number 3 overall. That doesn't even include Alex Sarr, who plays a lot of 5, who is a 7-footer and was drafted in the first round 2 years ago. So on one hand, I think he might be the best overall fit of these top 3 prospects for the Jazz at number 1 overall, but I'm also pretty confident he will not be the pick to the Wizards at number 2, so it's certainly an interesting dynamic. Ogabari averaged around 16 points per game and 8 rebounds. He's a really good scorer on the inside. He's a very good post defender. There are some questions with his athleticism. He doesn't really run the floor well, which certainly limits his overall upside. He also needs to add some bulk as well, and I think he has plenty of time to grow into his body. He certainly can jump, though. He's got a 40-plus inch vertical. He's a big-time lob threat. I think that's where you start with him offensively, and you hope the outside shot can improve. 33% beyond the arc last year, so there's certainly potential for that. And then Cam McKnight, who many scouts believe was the most impactful freshman in the country this year, averaging 19.4 points per game along with 6 rebounds, helping lead Illinois to a national championship appearance. It's not every day you see freshmen as the clear number 1 option on a team going to the championship, and scouts are going to like that because it shows that he contributes to winning. Great finisher around the basket, up and down as a shooter, but the shot mechanics and shot making upside is there. He's a good perimeter defender. I like what he provides athletically, and I could see him being the pick for Utah at number 1. I think realistically they pick either McKnight or Nobles with that top spot and hope Ogabari falls to number 3. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go with the big number 1, though. Then we get to this next tier of players, which starts with Dallas Carter from Kansas. 18.3 points per game, shot 40% from beyond the arc. He was a little inconsistent through the first month or 2 of the year. His stock actually went down compared to where it was going into the season. But really, ever since the start of February, he's been one of the best players in the country, averaging 21 points per game in that stretch. First team all Big 12. Lights out shooter. He can play on and off the ball. He can create for himself and others. He's a good facilitator, but he can also create his own shot. Not to mention he's a strong defensive prospect as well. I really think he's as good as those guys projected in the top 3, and I think he should be getting more hype. Stur Jacobs from Purdue is a very talented point guard, averaged 14 points per game and a little under 5 assists a night. One of the better passers in this class. Inconsistent as a scorer, but again, the shot-making upside is there. 44% from the field, 32% from 3, but he showed a lot of flashes as a scorer. He's just not as far along in that regard as, say, Nobles or McKnight or Dallas Carter is. But you're getting someone who initially can be a good pass-first point guard, and you hope he can grow into more of a consistent scorer. Shaquille Hunter is the biggest draft riser of anybody in this class. He was a fringe top 100 recruit coming into the season and quickly showed he was underranked. His stock went way up throughout the year, and when we last talked about him, he made it all the way to the late first round. Then, during the tournament, he dominates, averages 19 points per game in the 2 Final Four matchups, winning the NCAA's tournament MVP, helping lead Houston to a title. He's a 3-level scorer who can shoot the 3 ball, 33% from deep this year, 45% from 3 in the NCAA tournament. He's a really good rim protector, and he's a freak athlete. He can move up and down the floor really quickly. He can run the floor at a high level. He was a guy I really wanted the Warriors to pick, say, towards the end of the first round, but with his stock soaring up, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen because it would be a phenomenal fit if we were to get him. He fits today's game perfectly as a modern 5 while being the definition of a winner. And if I'm the Jazz, I'm absolutely considering him with one of those top picks. Let's take a look at the talented Duke duo. We will start with Princely Kenson, the talented forward who averaged 16 a night, 40% from beyond the arc, one of the best shooters in this class. He's improved so much as a three-point shooter from his high school career to now, and there's no reason to think that won't continue in the NBA. So already, he's got a pretty high floor because he's a knockdown perimeter shooter. I think the athletic upside, though, suggests that he could be more than a role player at the next level. I think he can create his own shot at a pretty high level and is solid defensively. Then we get to Riley Forloin, a guy whose stock has gone way up throughout the season. It isn't with big numbers, though. He only averaged 9.5 points per game. He wasn't all that efficient, but his feel for the game and his IQ is incredible for somebody at 18 years old. He's a phenomenal playmaker at his size, 4.2 assists per game, doesn't turn the ball over. He's a gritty, impactful, versatile defender who can guard the 1 through the 4. And NBA teams like his readiness to go. This is a guy who contributes to winning and will be good right away as a rookie. Cyrus Emdent, meanwhile, is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. I think he's a little bit raw, but this kid has superstar potential. He's new to the game of basketball, and you can tell he's a little bit raw, only 28% from 3, but he is a dynamic and explosive athlete. He is really good at slashing to the hole and finishing in contact, but he can get up there and throw it down as well. What impressed me most about him is that as a 19-year-old who's only been playing basketball for around 4 years, his feel for the game as a playmaker is really, really impressive. And then we get to Samuel Queen from the University of Florida, one of the biggest breakout players in the nation this year. A no-name as a freshman turned into a first-team All-American as a sophomore. He might have been the best player in the country through the first couple of months of the season. He slowed down once we got into SEC play, but was still really good, finishing with 16.5 points, nearly 6 assists, and 5 rebounds per game on 40% shooting from 3. I would describe his game as very savvy. He knows how to drive to the basket. He may not be the fastest guard in the world, but he's so efficient inside because he knows how to change his speed, and he knows how to avoid defenders inside, and he knows how to score in contact when necessary. Good shooter, good playmaker, good defender. Shepo Safiyanu from Florida State is a fascinating prospect to me. We have not talked about him yet, but he's a guy who NBA teams are really starting to like. He's a big forward who has shades of Draymond Green in the sense that he can guard a lot of different positions. He isn't necessarily a prolific scorer, but he's a very strong passer. A fifth-year senior at Florida State, he averaged 9.8 points per game, nearly 5 assists a night as well, on really efficient scoring, 55% from the field. Now, there are some questions with him. He's going to turn 24 years old as a rookie. A fifth-year breakout, that normally doesn't equate to success in the NBA, but his skill set is a little bit different because he can do everything, and he's a perfect role player for a contending team. For someone who's a playoff team in the lottery, I think they will be taking a long look at him because he can plug into just about any lineup and be successful. Desante Crawford from UConn is a walking bucket. Averaged the most points per game amongst high conference freshmen at 20.2 a night, on 46% shooting from the field and 39% from deep. He's a true three-level scorer who can win on and off the ball. That's what I like most about him. Yes, he puts the ball in the basket at a high level, but it's the way he does it. He can create his own shot. He can get open off the dribble. He can get open without the ball in his hands. And to have that versatility as a scorer is really valuable in today's league. And I could certainly see a team like the Jazz being interested in him, maybe not at number 1 or number 3, but someone who needs scoring, he's a perfect fit. Carter Smith from Texas Tech, his stock has gone way up this year. The numbers aren't necessarily eye-popping, 12.2 points per game, 3.1 assists. But this kid can shoot the piss out of the ball. 45% from 3 this year. Really good defender as well. I don't think he's ever going to be an all-star, but I think you're looking at a strong 3-and-D role player who, again, can win with and without the ball in his hands. Coming into the year, Jaden Carter was one of the top high school prospects in the country, and I still think he's going to go in the lottery, but he was a little disappointing this year with the Bruins. Very inconsistent production. 11.7 points per game, 43% from the field, just 28% from three. I think the scoring upside is there. I think the defensive upside is there, but he's got a lot of work to do on both ends of the floor. And if I'm a team willing to wait a couple of years on a developmental prospect, he might be my guy. Ezi Obiambo from North Carolina is up next. Another guy who at one point in time was slated to go into the top 5, but I don't think he will. That's because he's a little bit limited offensively, 10.5 points per game. He's a really good lob threat, but he doesn't really provide anything outside of the paint. He can't really shoot. He's not much of a playmaker. Defensively, he's inconsistent as well. So because of that, another guy who I think you're going to have to be patient with. You're going to have to take your time for a couple of years, but I think the upside with Opiambo is really solid. Jalen Carrington, another guy who at one point in time was projected very early in this class, but he was outshined by fellow Houston freshman Shaquille Hunter. Now, Carrington was still a vital piece of Houston's championship team this year. The scoring was not as good as it was in the first couple of months of the year, but he's a versatile player who gives them high energy minutes as an explosive above-the-rim athlete. I think when we first talked about him, I compared him in some ways to Zion Williamson, not necessarily in terms of play style. He's nowhere near the dominant scorer inside 15 feet that Zion Williamson is. He's nowhere near the playmaker that Zion is. But I think in terms of the size and athletic build, 6'7", 245, he's built like an NFL defensive end, but he can jump out of the gym, and he's one of the most explosive players on the floor. I think he's going to be a better defensive player than Zion as well. He's just a lot more nimble-footed on that end of the floor. He's versatile. He can switch onto the perimeter. And we saw it at Houston. This is a guy who can be a winning role player. Wasn't necessarily a big-time scorer for them, only put up 4 points in the championship game, but he was still really impactful because he was able to guard some of Illinois' best scorers. Zolio Galvez out of Gonzaga is a really simple player for me. Plug him in the corner and let him fire away. 41% three-point shooter this year, averaging just under 10 points per game. The numbers, again, with him are not necessarily flashy, but he has a very projectable skill set. I don't think you're ever looking at an all-star or a 20-point-per-game scorer, but he can really shoot the ball, and his spacing ability opens up the offense. I like what he offers as a playmaker as well. Many players like him, you don't really want holding the ball. You don't want them dribbling. You don't want them making decisions as a passer. Look at a guy like Michael Porter Jr., for example. Whenever he has the ball, you want him to shoot it. But with Galvez, I think he can provide a little bit more. He's not just a three-point shooter. Once we get through this lottery range, it really is a crapshoot. Elijah Harris from LSU had a good year. Jackson Ryan from Cal is a freak athlete. I want to look at Amari Cambridge, though, from Florida State. Another dynamic dunker, as you can see, throwing down the windmill. Cambridge was inconsistent this year, 9.6 points per game, 5.7 rebounds. This is someone who I think has 3-level scoring upside, but the efficiency from all 3 levels wasn't really there. Defensively, I think he's got a lot of work to do. I wouldn't call him a traffic cone, but I don't think he's a good defensive prospect. I like his feel for the game, though, as a 6'8", 220-pound forward. Those guys don't have the playmaking ability that Cambridge does, so if he can be more consistent on offense and improve a lot defensively, then I think you could be looking at a really, really well-rounded player. Into the 20s, again, this is really the crapshoot portion of the draft. Samuel Ojabo is one of my favorite players to watch in this class. Now, unfortunately, he's been pretty bad over the last month or two. His stock has gone down quite a bit, but he's still a very talented player, averaged around 10 points per game this year. 43% from the field. That number was above 50 through the first 10 games, and then it just tanked as the season went along. At 6'6", 250 pounds, he's kind of the tweener, but I think he's athletic enough to where it's not going to be necessarily an issue. Kind of like Jalen Carrington from Houston, who's 6'7", 245. Ojabo has enough quickness to guard players on the perimeter, but he's got the size and strength to bang down low with the big boys. As we go down the board even further, you've got Kareem Hadidi, Tristan McGrath from Australia, Tavion Powers, 13 points a game this year at Syracuse. We've got to take a look at Alex Wisham, though. We didn't get to look at his film, the last prospect profile, because he was injured. He only played the final 10 games of the year for St. Louis, but he helped them late on their tournament run, averaging around 7 points and 9 rebounds. This is a freak athlete at 7'4", 230 pounds. He is an elite shot blocker. In around 20 minutes a night this year, he still averaged over 4 blocks per game. Very similar skill set to his dad, Ashton Wisham, who was with our Blazers franchise last year. Ashton was nothing more than an inconsistent scorer, but he was an elite defender and a great shot blocker because he was so tall and his arms are so long. Alex Wisham is even bigger. Osborne Autoridge from Kansas is a really fascinating player for me. 5-star prospect coming into the year who was disappointing as a freshman with the Jayhawks. Now, he averaged over 10.5 points per game, but the efficiency was pretty pitiful. 39% for the field, 23% from 3. He's got a long ways to go offensively, but another guy who's got good feel for the game as a playmaker and a really, really good defensive prospect. Elijah Jackson, another guy who I think is going to be a very solid defensive player at the next level. When we last talked about him, he was in conversations of being a top 10 pick, but the offense is just really not there, and I don't think his skill set really translates on the offensive side of the ball. He doesn't really provide anything as a scorer outside of about 5 feet. He doesn't really provide anything as a playmaker, but he's a very good defender. Hamadi Adebowale from USC is up next. A talented big man who I think is an ascending young player. He's improved a lot over his high school career now at USC. Good finisher around the rim, very solid interior defender. And at 6'11", 255 pounds, I think Adebowale already has an NBA-level body, and I think for a second-round pick, he'll be able to contribute pretty early on, maybe 12 minutes a game this year as a backup big. But for the second round, you certainly won't complain with that at all. Going deeper into the 30s, we're now looking at some guys who really could fall to our second-round pick at number 54 if the cards hold right. Edouard Paquet from France is a very interesting player to me because I think he has a lot of similarities to Antoine Salis coming out a couple years ago. I think he's a little bit bigger and a little bit more athletic than Salis, but he's also a little bit worse all around. 8.4 points per game this year on inconsistent efficiency, much like Salis entering the pros, and well, he shot over 42% from 3 this year. That was patched quickly. Jesus Montero, I think, is a big sleeper. Wasn't really on a lot of people's radars coming into the year, but after watching the film, there's some upside with him. Nearly 9 points per game in one of the better Spanish leagues. 6 rebounds a night as well. 34% from 3. He can pop out and shoot the long ball. As we look into the 40s now, Janai Schofield from Texas A&M is a guy we've already talked about. A bigger guard coming in at 6'7", weighs in at around 212 pounds. So he's got really good size at his position. And the numbers are impressive. 13.6 points per game, 4 assists a night, 38% from 3. But his stock has dipped a little bit. His play was very inconsistent during the NCAA tournament. It's unclear if he can play without the ball in his hands. He has the prototypical size of an NBA wing, but his usage rate was so high this year. Nkanye Mbongo from Cameroon is a very intriguing player to me. Super athletic, really high upside, plays for the Senegal national team. I think he's really raw, only averaged 5.3 points a game this year. But this is someone who you take a dart throw on in the second round. It's going to take him 3-4 years to develop. I don't think he's going to be a rotation player until then. But you hope he can become a really, really good player because he's got that kind of ceiling. Another player who's newer to the game of basketball. Miles Ogbonna from Maine is one of the most fascinating prospects in this draft. It's not often you have a one and done from the University of Maine, but after the Black Bears' Final Four run, he positions himself in this draft. Now, he had a really good year, and he's been on draft radars even before the big tournament run, averaging 14.5 points per game with nearly 6 assists, but he is really inefficient. He averaged 38% from the field in the Colonial Athletic Association Conference. Yikes. Even during the tournament run, he played well, 16 points per game over the 5 tournament games, but he shot 37% in the tournament. His shot diet really is not good, and that's going to have to be cleaned up. Caden Starling from Oregon is kind of the opposite. He's an ultra-efficient player around the rim, shot 51% from the field. It's not often you find a freshman guard who shoots over 50%, but the rest of this game needs some work. The outside shot isn't really there, up and down season defensively, but really, really good at slashing to the basket. Into the 50s now, this is really where it's a crapshoot. The one guy I really want to highlight is another player who has relations to someone we know from the Portland Trail Blazers series. So late in the Blazers franchise, I think after our first title, we drafted Terrence Apprinter III, a talented big man who, like Ashton Wisham, was a really good defender, but he was more of a 4. He was a lot more mobile than Wisham, and his son, Trey Apprinter, again, I think has some similarities. I don't think he's ever going to be a great offensive player. He hasn't really shown the upside of doing so this year at Minnesota, but he's a little bit bigger than his dad at 7 foot and was phenomenal this season on the defensive end of the floor. Even averaging only 5.5 points per game, the impact was clearly there. Having him and Norwood Nobles in the front court helped lead Minnesota to being the best defensive team in the Big Ten. Let's talk about these mock drafts now. We'll start with the sporting news with Norwood Nobles going number 1. Desante Crawford at number 3. I really like the fit with the Jazz because they need scoring. Number 3 is early, but I don't completely hate it. Jabari Ogabari at 5 would certainly be a surprise, but a pleasant one for the Montreal Huskies. And then moving through the rest of the first round, here is a look at some of the other picks. As for us, at number 54, they have us picking Tristan McGrath. I know it says it's the Kings pick, but that's not true. That is our selection. 2K has Ogabari going number 1, Cam McKnight at 2, and so the Jazz still would land Norwood Nobles at number 3. 2K's mock drafts are usually the worst. These ones are always wrong, it feels like. I felt like this one wasn't that bad, though. As for us in the second round, they have us picking Miles Ogbonna from Maine. I would certainly be intrigued to pick him, even with the efficiency woes. He's a really talented and fun player. NBA.com, I think this one is usually the best. They have Norwood Nobles at number 1, McKnight and Ogabari in the top 3, as I kind of expect. This would be really fun for the 2 expansion teams, landing Dallas Carter and Shaquille Hunter. I think both of those guys should be in consideration for the number 1 pick and would be great starts for the Huskies and the Sonics. As for us at number 54, we would be picking Raymond Filibuster, the senior guard from Missouri, averaged 17 points a night this year. High-impact player who could be ready to go as a role player. As for the Combine, the biggest thing I noticed about this class is many of the top prospects were there to compete, which I love seeing. Norwood Nobles, no longer the clear number 1 pick, feels like he has a chip on his shoulder. Put on a show at the Combine. Jabari Ogabari from Purdue also went to the Combine and also did really well. So 2 of the projected top 3 picks showing up to the Combine and performing at a really high level. I think that's certainly going to resonate with scouts and certainly make teams like those guys even more. Maybe they end up on the same team in Utah, who knows. As for the pre-draft workouts, I invited guys who I thought had a chance to slip through the cracks, maybe guys who I like in the teens who could fall to the 20s, guys in the 20s I like who could fall to the 30s. Keep in mind, we definitely could look to move up, though, given that we've got the assets to do it. I'm expecting that Bulls pick next year to be quite good, given their best player is Brandon Pajemski. But don't forget about the swap best Clippers and Sixers pick we have in 2029. We got that all the way back in year 1. In the Moses Moody Adem bonus swap. Both the Sixers and Clippers are probably going to be quite bad for a little while, and we would only need one of those teams to be bad for that pick to become quite valuable, but I would expect both of them stink. The Clippers' best player is Michael Porter Jr., and the Sixers are probably getting set for a rebuild. So as we look at the pre-draft workout, this is the list of players I ultimately landed on for our invites. There were a couple guys who really stood out. Edouard Paquet from France, I thought was really impressive. He did great in the athletic testing. He shot the ball really well, which was encouraging after an inefficient shooting season overseas. Shepo Safiano also impressed me as a shooter. I thought he did really well. So I think Safiano and Paquet probably were the 2 biggest winners of the pre-draft workouts. I want to talk about some stars who could potentially be on the move during draft night, and we have the assets to potentially make a deal. New Orleans is the biggest one. I think Zion Williamson is gone. I would look at DeJounte Murray and Darius Garland as well. The 76ers tried to run it back, and it did not work. I think Joel Embiid is gone, and I think Tyrese Maxey could join him. The Bucks had a really good season, but Giannis, Paul George, and Jaden Ivey are not under contract. Paul George is a player option. I think he's going to say yes. The Bucks are going to do everything in their power to re-sign Giannis and Ivey, but depending on certain circumstances, they could look to make some moves. Donovan Mitchell could be available. The Cavs are only a year removed from the finals, though. The Celtics is an interesting one. They could just try to tear it down and build around Everest McLeon, but I think it is kind of unlikely. Bam Adebayo only has 1 year left. I could certainly see him being available for trade. I think it's pretty likely LaMelo Ball is gone. The Hornets had a pretty good season last year, making the second round of the playoffs, but this year they were pretty horrific. I could see LaMelo wanting out. Anthony Davis, he is 34 years old. I could see the Lakers looking to start fresh, build around Shavonte Fitzgerald. Also, Mark Williams is here. Do I get like half credit for that? Because he was on the Lakers for like a day. The Dallas Mavericks tried to pivot, losing Luka and signing Trae Young. I don't think it really worked. I think trading him and Kyrie probably would be beneficial. That brings us to the expansion draft, and we only have 7 players under contract, the best 7 players on our team last year. So we're probably going to have to decide to lose one of these guys, or maybe not. I guess we can protect everyone. I don't know. We'll find out how it really works in the next episode with the NBA draft and the expansion draft as well. We might have to lose one of our 7 guys, one of our core 7 players. If we do, who do you think we should potentially let go of? If not, that would be ideal, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. Hope you guys enjoy. Next episode will be the NBA draft. I'm not sure of what day it will be. Sometime later this week. I'll probably have more information on the YouTube community tab and, of course, on the Discord server as well. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.